Hey guys, Ken Smith Fishing. Thanks for tuning in again. I just came off the water and I was cleaning up the floor of the boat as I always do. And it got me thinking about a series of questions that I've gotten recently. And it's the same questions I get generally year over year. And that is, what's my setup for fishing rattle baits? And let me just say, so when I say rattle trap fishing, I mean all rattle baits. And I'll cover what I mean by all rattle baits. So to me, rattle trap fishing is like saying I'm gonna go make a Xerox copy. It's a universal term, although Bill Lewis rattle trap is a very specific bait. So I picked up 9 traps, if you will, out of my floor. And right now Rayburn is 4 feet low, so the grass is very, very shallow. And so let me walk you through first what I like to throw my trap on, and then a little bit about my thoughts on the different styles of traps, again, rattle baits, and the different colors that I like to throw down here. So I like personally a very, very stiff rod. I'm experimenting, so as you guys know, Lou's changed some of their model numbers up this year. So I've got about 4 or 5 rods that I've kind of got in the rotation right now. And I'm going to make a decision in the next month. So I've got a bunch of different rods. I'm going to make a decision what my rattle trap rod's going to be. Now right now, today, you saw me throwing that Magnum heavy cover rod. It's a CMHC rod. Most places are sold out of this rod right now, so they're pretty hard to get. But don't get hung up on that. I'll let you know which rod I decide on because I'm cycling through a bunch of different rods. But this particular rod, as all of my trap rods, are at least 7'6", and I go up to a 7'10" or 11 rod for trap fishing. Most of them are in this 7'6" range. A lot of the importance is how long that is and where you like to hold that rod when you're popping it out of that grass. So that's a personal feel. Now I'm in this case throwing it on an extra wide spool reel. I don't always do that. I was just doing that on this one because it was a 7-1-to-1 reel and I wanted a little bit faster reel. I almost always throw a 6-8-to-1 reel. So I had a great question. Somebody was watching the video of Dickie and I fishing that team tournament the other day. And you couldn't hear some of that conversation. What you guys heard was, I said, just find your cadence. And the first part of that conversation you didn't hear is he was frustrated I was getting more bites than him. Now part of that was because his knee's still hurting, so he was on the back deck, so he was fishing mostly used water. But we are, and again, most of my trap fishing, if you will, is modeled because I fished with Dickie for 10 years, one of the best trap fishermen, I believe, in the country. And he has always been a big believer in get that cadence right, get that certain speed, and some days it's that, and some days it's that. And you just got to find that cadence. And let me just also state right there, I fished with some really good, so I fished BFLs, I fished some ABAs, I fished the Toyota series, which used to be the Costa series. I fished with some very good co-anglers. But the one mistake I have seen most often by co-anglers is they throw that bait out there and they reel it back pretty quick because they don't want the hassle of it getting hung up in the grass. Yes, you'll catch some fish just throwing it out and reeling it in, but you want that bait hitting that grass. Now, I'm going to tell a third-hand story here that Dickie shared with me the other day. And I had never thought this through until he said this. So Brian Branham, who you guys have heard me talk about a lot, was on a guide trip the other day, had a guide trip down here, and said he was over the grass bed and looked down, and there was a bright orange crawfish crawling on top of that grass, which I had never thought about. They get on top of that grass. And he said, as it did, a bass come up to get it, and that crawfish took off. And if you've ever picked up a crawfish, you know that tail goes, right? Pop, 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 pop. Sounds just like a rattle trap. And he said it was like a light switch went on. It's like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what these fish are doing. They're on top of that grass eating those crawfish that are crawling around on top of that grass. I'm assuming eating something. I don't know the fact. Matter of fact, you know what? I know one of my viewers owns a crawfish farm, so I'll do a follow-up to this. I'm going to talk to him a little bit more about what they see on the farm as crawfish behavior. That's probably a good video. So stick with me on that. I'll come back to that. But anyway, so that's what you're trying to do, is mimic that crawfish in the top of that grass popping out of that grass. So lesson 1, if you're not hitting the grass pretty regularly, you're probably going to get outfished by somebody in the boat with you or around you who's willing to work a little bit harder. Now you don't want it buried in the grass and jerking it out. if you ever watch him fish, and I don't want to give him a big head, but Chris McCall is really, really good at this. And if you watch McCall must have incredibly strong forearms, because he fishes a trap up here like this, and it hurts my arm even to do that. You'll see him popping that trap out of the top of that grass. That's exactly what he's doing. He's just got, I have to put it down here to get it out, but he's gotten so good with it, he can keep that rod tip up and just keep popping that thing and making it flutter over the top of that grass. All right, so let's talk a little bit about setup, and I get a lot of questions about this. I am throwing, and I'm throwing in Vizex mostly 15 and 20 pound fluorocarbon. Now, I've gotten a little bit spoiled throwing Tatatsu 20 pound. I don't have any Tatatsu 15 pound, but I will soon. It's quite a bit more expensive, but it's just such a nice line. I don't know what to say about that, but so I prefer, if I could throw it any way I wanted to, I would always throw a rattle bait on 15 pound fluorocarbon. But if I'm around timber, I want heavier line. But also, for example, what's going on right now, that 20 pound diameter line helps that bait stay shallower. There's just more drag on the line, and it causes that bait to fish higher. So we've been throwing a 1/2 ounce, trying to keep it over the top of that grass, and throwing it on 20 pound fluorocarbon, again, to keep it on top of that grass. You heard me mention earlier, I usually throw it on a 6/8-to-1 reel. I've been throwing it on a 7/1-to-1, which makes it just a little easier to keep it over the top of that grass without just wearing your wrist out. But most of my reels are 6/8-to-1. But when I'm doing what I'm doing right now, all the reels I'm throwing are 7/1-to-1, because I want to know that cadence is exactly the same if I pick up a different rod. So every rod I've been throwing a rattle bait on for the last couple of weeks are all the exact same retrieve ratio. They're all 7/1-to-1 reels. Now let's break down baits, and it might help you a little bit if you see kind of how I have baits stored. So right there, 1/2 ounce and less traps. There's a 3/4 and a, sorry about that, I had a little SD card failure. So 1/2 ounce and up traps. Those are all, they're not all, they're mostly Bill Lewis rattle traps. I do carry with me a few cotton cordels, okay? So those, but there's just a few of those in there. Most of these baits, and by the way, we talked about hooks in the last video. I'll put a link to it right there if you didn't see that, where I talked specifically about how we change the hooks on all these baits. So 1/2 ounce rattle traps and less. So there's some 1/4 ounce traps in there as well. Now this one is all knockers. So knockers means a single rattle bait. Now some of those are Bill Lewis single rattle baits. If I can get one out of there. Okay, so single baits. And then there's all kinds. There's Yo-Zuri knocker baits in there. I'm not going to get it out, but a Yo-Zuri knocker bait. I also throw quite a bit. Academy makes their own brand knocker bait. I like that bait as well. So knocker baits in there. Quakes and snatches in there. And then this one is Yo-Zuris and red eyes. And then also included in this one are just various and sundry other baits. So for example, that's a Takahiro Omori. I'm pretty sure that's a Daiwa bait. There's some Lucky Crafts mixed in here. And by the way, as sick as this sounds, these are all my 1/2 ounce and smaller baits. I've got same boxes with 3/4 and one, mostly 3/4, but a few 1 ounce baits mixed in there as well. So generally speaking, now you guys, I've talked about this before. I'm not too particular on soft plastic colors. To me, there's 3 colors, right? There's a shad or a white color, that's 1. There's a black blue or a black red, that's 2. And then there's a green pumpkin watermelon, that's 3. And I really generally don't care. I've never, a couple of times in my life, if I felt like somebody was getting bites on a specific color that I couldn't dead on mimic. Trap fishing is different to me, and I cannot explain it. When I have 2 baits that look relatively identical, but only a very slight difference, and I'll give you a perfect example of that. That's the bait I was throwing for the last couple of weeks. It's an older style Bill Lewis, and the newer ones have some gold in them. and Newberry was pitching a fit because all of his were the newer version with the gold in them. I don't know if you can actually still get that bait. I'll look before I post this video. But in the trap world, I have been to the point that the bait in here, if I've still got it, in a Costa a couple of years ago, I got so hung up on a bait. There's an orange trap that's got a little tiny strip of pink in the middle of it. And if I wasn't throwing that bait, I was in meltdown lockdown. But what I will typically do is when I leave the ramp in the morning, now this morning I only had 4 trap rods tied on. I had a bleeding shiner, I had a brown eye trap, 1/2 ounce traps. I had actually I had 5. I had a Swank Zavala Zebra tied on, 5/8 ounce, just a little bit too heavy right now. I had a, this is a, I believe that's the Academy brand knocker, and I could be wrong about that. And then I had one more. What was the 5th bait I had tied on? Oh, I had a gold red-eyed shad on. And so generally that's how I start, but as I cycle through the day, if I don't get bent on one, especially if I go through a stretch, sorry, as typical in the Smith household, distracted by barking dogs. But so I go out, and that's generally what I do. I'll have a gold or silver, a bleeding shiner, and then several hues of orange. Now, if I get in more off color water, I'll go to stuff with more yellows in them. Matter of fact, one of my favorite baits is a Yo-Zuri bait that's a fire tiger. So, but I generally only throw that in kind of off color water. And what I do throughout the day, especially when I'm going through an area where I know there have been fish, I'll make several casts in there with one bait, pick up the other, make several more casts in there. Now, in general, there are no rules, but in general, on bright, clear days, I'm going to be throwing a bleeding shiner, or believe it or not, a chrome blueback. That's generally what I'm throwing on bright days. On overcast days, I will lean more towards the oranges, and I really like throwing a gold trap, again, whatever brand you choose to throw, on overcast days. When the brim spawn starts is when I start going more to brim looking colors, and I'll actually throw several of them that are kind of real similar to what a brim actually looks like. But generally speaking, that's where I go. It doesn't matter what the weather is, I'll always have an orange one tied on, because when they get on that orange one, it beats everything else. They've not been on it yet, but they're really, really close. I had a couple bites on it today. And what I try to look for is those fish that are slapping that bait, so that I know I'm close. They're committed to come look at it, but they're not committed yet to eat it. Now, for the last couple of trips out, you've seen them. They've had that sideways in their mouth. I mean, they're smoking it, so they're liking that bleeding shiner. But again, my general rules are bright days, I'm throwing something that's a lot of flash and or something that's a very natural looking bait. And on dark days, it's golds and oranges. And then I always have a couple of different hues of orange on. There's almost always something in that bait color. Part of why we developed the Zavala Zebra, let me grab one of those, was I wanted something with some orange, but something with some white or some silver look flash in there for those exact what I'm talking about, those cloudy days when I kind of want something that goes both ways, and that bait works perfect for that. So, and there's also a little bit of blue around the eye, and I'm a big fan of having some blue in a bait too. Now, I love chrome blueback. One of the baits down here that quietly catches a lot of fish, interestingly, especially on those dark days, are the Albert Collins color. Oh, I don't have one in here. They're in the back box. They're in another box. But it's this color right here. I'll post it so y'all can see it. That's a bait that as we get further into the winter, I will pretty much always have one of those tied on the front deck too. There's days they won't touch it, but when they commit to that bait, when they want that bait, a lot of times it's the only bait that they want to eat. Now, traps versus knockers. There just is no rhyme or reason to it. And I will say, I have stood next to somebody, Dickie specifically, on a day when they'll only eat the trap or they'll only eat the knocker. And the only way to do that is to keep rotating to them. So for pretty much all of my baits, I have each color in a trap and in a knocker. And I just rotate back and forth to figure out which one they want that day. And it could change day to day, it can change hour to hour. You just got to have multiple baits. So I guess the lesson here is keep changing them, keep trying different things. You just never know what their mood's going to be. But what you're looking for is not those that are hooked on the side of the face. You want them, especially if you can catch them where that trap's crossways in their mouth. That means they're coming up there and they're wrecking that bait. And that tells you you're on the right color. But as soon as they just start popping that bait again, you're real long and your line goes slack, or you feel them thump it and they're not getting it, once that happens more than once, you need to be changing bait colors and trying something else. Now, we talked about this in that last video. Generally speaking, that 1/2 ounce rattle trap is probably the shallowest running 65 or 70 millimeter long bait. The Yo-Zuri and the Quakes are both 65. I say that, I think the Quake's actually 70, but their shape, the Yo-Zuri's only 65 millimeters. Those baits run a little bit deeper. They're also 5/8 ounce baits. Now, I will tell you, and I didn't say this in the video, you guys heard me say the other day I broke a fish off early in the day. I broke that fish off on my suspending Quake, and it was the only orange suspending Quake I have. I threw the other one today. I've got one of them now, and I did not get bid on it, and they've been sold out since they came out. And I am just like you guys. I just have to get in line to get them. Retail or pro staff guys get no better access to them than retail customers do. So I would love to have a couple of those, and I just don't have them right now. But in this water condition right now, that suspending trap, suspending Quake, if you will, is perfect, and I can't get one. I've got one, and they just didn't want that color. I'll show you the one I got. It's in the floor because I was throwing it today. So that's the only color I have. And I really like this bait because it's a great big bait. You're going to get a big bite on it. But it was an overcast day, and they just didn't want that bait. They didn't want that color, and I'm really frustrated because I had caught a bunch of fish. I had kind of kept it under my hat on that orange one, and it's gone, and I can't get another one right now. So you guys will be in the same line I am. I've got the notice in with 6 cents that when they come back in stock, I'll get some, and I will. But anyway, so the key things, keep swapping baits, colors and knockers and traps. Do not get stuck on a brand. I wish I could tell you all I catch fish on is 6 cents because I'm a 6 cents pro staff guy. It's not. I threw every one of them today. I threw a trap. I threw a 6 cents. I did not throw a Lucky Craft. I throw Yo-Zuri. I didn't throw a Cotton Cordell, but I mean I will. I'll throw all of them in any given day. I'll throw the Daiwa. They make a great bait too. And then pay attention to your cadence. Pay attention not just to where you got that bite, but how you were working that bait when you got that bite. And I cannot stress to you enough how important I believe it is to have the gear that mimics each other. And the other thing I'll do is when I'm throwing a 7-1-to-1 reel, I want them to have roughly the same amount of line, because a reel that's half full versus completely full is picking up a whole lot more or less line each handle turn. I want them as identical as I can possibly get them. So that's my current take on rattle bait fishing. I'll update you guys some more as we go through the springtime on which rod I finally settle on. And I like that one a lot, but I also like to show you this rod. I don't think I've talked about this rod at all. So this is another rod that they're making. And you can see actually that's a Zavala Zebra that's on that rod. It's a full handle, and it's incredibly comfortable to me. Now this one is a SGLR. It's a 710.5, which is right at the top. It's a ledge raider. It's called a fast action. I like this rod a lot. This rod reminds me, for those of you who had them, there was a great trap rod. American Rodsmith made it, and it was called, I think it was a Denny Brauer model, but it was called the Predator. And I like having a rod that's a little bit tip heavy. It's just a comfort level for me. I like this rod a lot. And of course, I'm actually throwing it on a Mark Rose rod I like a lot that Newberry got me on. I'm just trying to get comfortable because I want to have one rod that's my trap rod, and I'll make that decision pretty soon. But that rod, that's also become my swim bait rod. I love this rod, and this handle is super comfortable. It's funny, I had gone to nothing but split handles and just kind of bought this one on a whim. Actually, that's not true. I bought it because I fished with it with Dickie New one day when we did the Phoenix boat review, and I liked it so much I bought one. So that's a neat rod too. But anyway, thanks for tuning in. I've got more videos coming up later this week. I think you guys will enjoy. I'm going to talk a little bit about running rough water, and of course we'll have another boat review up. We've got several coming up right here real shortly, so we'll get boat reviews up for you guys as well. Thanks for tuning in, guys. See you.